dear listener, this is MIJ FM and this is an exclusive interview with the European Union Ambassador to Malawi, Rune Skinnebach. My name is Georgia Mbawu Chirombo. Now, among the topics under discussion is the multi-annual indicative program the EU is implementing in the country, strides which Malawi is registering in attaining sustainable development goals, as well as efforts by the European Union to promote women empowerment in the country. So do stay tuned. Ambassador, thank you so much for taking your time to grant this interview.
Thank you so much for having me.
Firstly, let's talk about the multi-annual indicative program, which is running through 2021 to 2027. And I know that the EU is providing about 352 million euros towards the project for the next 3 years. What is your take on this undertaking?
Indicative program covers a period of 7 years. The 352 million covers a period from 2021 to 24. So we are coming to the end of that cycle now. In 24, we are having, as we speak, actually a midterm review where we look into the success of these programs in order to determine the envelope for the remaining 3 years. First years have gone well. They've gone well as a development partner. One of our success criteria is do we succeed in implementing the funds? And yes, we have managed to implement a series of projects, to commit funds under a series of projects in the 3 sectors where we work, which is human development, it's governance, both democratic and economic governance, and it's green resilient transition, so energy, infrastructures, etc. And in all these 3 sectors, we have succeeded in launching a series of projects. It's still early days to see whether the substance is working, whether the projects are successful, because what we do know is that there are still major challenges when it comes to human development in the country. Of course, we know that too few girls are going to secondary school, too few students are succeeding to get into tertiary education. We know when we look at the infrastructures, I mean, certainly I came yesterday from Lilongwe to Blant. I can certify to not all the infrastructures are in a satisfactory state, but also energy infrastructures. We have all witnessed the load shedding that we've had in the past years. We've witnessed that there are challenges and shortcomings that needs to be addressed. Similarly, when it comes to green resilient growth, there are a series of good initiatives underway, but there are also a series of challenges. And I think we can do a lot on the private sector, and investors can do a lot. The government can also do a lot in terms of making sure that the legislative framework for a private sector and investment-led growth is in place, that Malawi is an attractive place to invest, that there are no laws that scares away foreign direct investors, or even more important, that the laws and the tax regime is in place and is defined in a way that makes Malawi competitive compared to its neighbors. Because if it's more interesting for me as a foreign investor to go to Zambia or Botswana instead of Malawi, then there's no money coming in here. And if there's one thing that is needed in Malawi, it's investment, and it's a business conducive climate.
Okay, so come 2027, you're very optimistic that the program will achieve some of its intended objectives?
Yes, I think that we are very convinced that it will be successful in terms of making life better for a lot of Malawian people, but also in terms of enhancing the partnership that we have with Malawi. You know, we have been in the country since 1976. And it was a classical donor-beneficiary kind of relationship, which gradually has developed into a much more mature, much more political partnership, where we agree on a number of fronts, on climate change, on the multilateral platforms. Malawi agrees with us when it comes to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. I mean, we work together politically as a completely different pair of partners now than we did in 1976, 50 years ago.
Now let's talk about infrastructure development, because that's one of the key areas as well if Malawi has to attend the Malawi 2063. The EU has pumped in a lot of funds also in terms of infrastructure development, and some of those funds have gone into the rehabilitation of the M1 road. What is your impression of the country's infrastructure landscape?
as I say, there are a number of challenges, and if you have driven on the M1 road, you can certainly see that it's a relevant project to rehabilitate it. It will save time, it will save money, it will make connectivity much, much better. And similarly, there are other infrastructure needs that are being addressed. I'm quite optimistic that there's progress being made. We are working on interconnector with Mozambique. We are working on the Eastern Backbone. We are looking into doing something with Zambia also. I think it's about getting Malawi connected now. And then there are challenges, because we know even if there is a high demand for energy in Malawi or electricity, we also know that the grid can only support so much. So we need to look at the grid also and make sure that it has the capacity to respond to the demand of the Malawians. Electricity is one of the key factors. You start out with transport infrastructure, but energy infrastructure is so critical also if we want investments. If we want success with the mega farms or the whole commercialization of agriculture, it is absolutely critical that there's electricity to drive the irrigation systems. And then, of course, there should be roads, so there are access to markets also. So, no, there are still some challenges, but there are lots of good projects underway also.
Okay, now let's shift our attention to the Sustainable Development Goals. The cutoff point for the SDGs is 2030. That is 6 years to go for countries to attain the SDGs. The EU is undertaking a number of initiatives to help Malawi attain the SDGs. You talk about the WASH project, which aims at promoting sanitation, but also we've got other nutrition projects which the EU is undertaking. How would you rate the country's performance in terms of achieving the SDGs? Most importantly, also, if you focus on the projects that are being implemented with the help of the EU.
So I think that, in a sense, Malawi is punching above its weight when it comes to sustainable development goals. We are doing better than we should be, especially considering the external shocks that Malawi has suffered. Like many other countries, admittedly, but other countries may have more resilience, because resilience, certainly in Malawi, is about poverty. It is no coincidence that Cyclone Freddy, which was in fact merely a tropical storm when it hit Blantyre, caused so many casualties. This is not due to lack of resilience. This is due to too much poverty. And I think that with many of the challenges Malawi is facing, when we talk about lack of skills, I mean, of course there's lack of skills. If there's not enough students going to university, let alone children going to school, if we cannot feed the children the food they should have to develop properly during childhood, how can we question if we have enough skills to do what is needed? So we need to start at the right point. Malawi has been faced with a number of challenges. There has been the extreme weather events. We spoke about COVID. We've had the polio, the cholera outbreaks, and we've had the war against the Russian aggression against Ukraine, which has caused increased fertilizer prices and thereby a food crisis, which cannot be controlled internally. And all these elements require focus. And even if the government is conducting a largely adequate policy to attain the SDGs, there by necessity has been many ad hoc decisions in order to feed the Malawians. Suddenly the soy exporters being arrested. These kind of things that doesn't help the economy and doesn't help the attainment of the SDGs, but it does help to feed the Malawians in the short term, which is the most acute and important need for any government, I guess.
So essentially you're saying internally we're doing well, but then we just need to probably learn more how to adapt to the external shocks as well so that we can do better.
We need to create that buffer, and we are trying to help Malawi have that buffer. We did it with the extended credit facility that Malawi obtained end of last year. We are still waiting to hear echoes back from Washington. They're at the spring meetings now, including the Minister of Finance discussing. I hope that the Minister of Finance can convince the World Bank and the IMF that even if we are slightly off track, that there are good reasons behind that, and that we can keep the ECF, because it's not enough to obtain it, we also need to keep it.
Okay, now let's dive into the last two questions, and these are to do with women's participation in politics. but also women's ability to take up public offices. I'll start with the ability of women to take up public offices, which is a big concern in the country, to say that we need to do more to empower the women to take up these offices so that this also serve as an inspiration to young girls out there to say women can do it. I would like to understand from you, Ambassador, what are some of the capacity building opportunities and openings that the EU is offering to kind of empower women to be able to take up these public offices, to build their capacity?
If you allow, I'd take a step back, because we have an obligation in all our programs to, in a cross-cutting way, address the gender issue. That means that 85% of our programs needs to address gender aspects, and 15%, I think, or 20% needs to directly be targeting gender aspects. So it is something that we are very, very much focused on. We also, even and I'm an old man, I learned in school how important women are for development of all countries, because they are it's the half of the population that handle the money well, and they don't go party as soon as they get them. This is something that is very deep in us. Concretely, we try to help from school. We try to give bursaries to female students in secondary school. We try to increase the number of women going to TVET centers by having special sleeping facilities for women, so they are not afraid of staying there and can concentrate on the work. We favor female entrepreneurs. And we do what we can also in terms of engaging with women on International Women's Day. When we engage with political parties, we ask about the number of women. When we talk to the Speaker of Parliament, who is a woman, about how to get more women into politics, we always push for that. Now, this being said, we have not been very pushy on creating special seats for women, because we are convinced that women are just as qualified as men, and this is elected offices, and I think Malawians should recognize it also and vote for the best ones, and they will find that at least half of them will be women.
So it should be about their ability to do the job as well, not necessarily just because they're women.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But the people I engage the most with, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Speaker of Parliament, are both women. So you're on a good track and doing much better. You're one of the few African countries who have had a female president already.
That's encouraging,
I think there are lots of positive signs.
Okay, now still talking about women's participation in politics. So ahead of the 2025 general elections, there are concerns as well that how do we empower more women to aspire for various positions, be it at constituency level, even at presidential level? But what I would like to understand from you, Ambassador, is how does the EU ensure the continuity of its initiatives towards fostering women's participation in various aspects when we talk about elections, but also even beyond the elections?
I think it's very important to understand, even if elections are absolutely critical for any democracy, it is by no means the only pillar. Elections, it's 1 week every 5 years. Democracy is really what happens in between. This is where we see those elected living up to their promises or carrying out their duties in a responsible manner. This is where we see the voters holding those they voted for accountable and responsible for their decisions. This is where we see the exercising of free speech, of free right to assembly. This is where we see democracy flourish. And this is where women also should be more present. They should be vocal. They should occupy the space of civil society. They should write in the media. They should be editors of the big media. Yes, we should not elect women just because they're women, but we should favor them because they need to be role models for their sisters, for their children, for their friends, and we need to demonstrate that women can carry out these jobs just as well, at least as well as the men are doing it. And I think you're a prime example yourself, sitting here behind the microphone, doing what no women did 30 years ago.
Well, Ambassador, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, dear listener, that was an exclusive interview with the European Union Ambassador to Malawi, Rune Skinnebach. I'm Georgia Mbao Chirombo. Thank you for listening.